Sneakers and Cleats, the podcast.
Welcome back to the Sneakers and Cleats podcast. This is episode 14. It is Friday, August 11th. Thank goodness it is Friday. This episode is going to be predominantly a tribute to two San Antonio legends that are going to be going into the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame this weekend. Greg Popovich, Tony Parker, congratulations to both of them. Press conference is coming up a little bit later today. They deserve all the praise that we can give them. And while Don is up in Springfield, Mass. covering it, Chuck is off, so why not bring in another San Antonio legend in his own right, David Chancellor. Welcome to the San Antonio Sneakers and Cleats podcast.
This is super cool. Like, and what I mean by that is that the sports department has one of these things. Like, this is great. Like, this is an opportunity to, certainly on a weekly basis between the three of you guys, like to get a new perspective, a younger perspective. But then you have Chuck and Don, who obviously, we're talking, 70 some odd years combined. And they were there in the heart of what we're going to talk about today. And, I say this humbly, thank God I was too.
I was going to say, so were you.
Yeah, this was I was trying to tell my son a while back, like, you don't understand, man. Like, Daddy covered the Spurs when they were just the standard.
Right.
And now that Wemby's coming and everybody's fired up for that and everybody's back on the bandwagon, it's like, yes. But there was a time when it was like it was the best. It was the best of the best. And we'll talk about two guys who were really at part of the center of all that.
Must be kind of nice just to look at your son Luke and be like, Daddy's kind of a badass,
Well, he always has a really good way of bringing me back down to earth.
Yeah, he humbles you a little bit.
Dude, it's not the 80s. You're so not cool. And then my daughter's always like, nobody watches you. I'm like, hey.
Ouch.
That hurts.
Ouch. I mean, you are on at 4:30 to 7, so it's pretty early.
Yes, I am.
I was going into the gym today, and David was wrapping up his workout at 8:20 in the morning after he's already done 2.5 hours of TV.
Had to get something in real quick.
All right, well, give us a little bit of the background. Right now, you're a morning anchor here at News 4. Been that since 2018.
Yeah. I mean, my life is here. My life is tied into Channel 4. I go back to when it was KMOL. For those who don't know,
it's pretty old. That's like when I was born.
Yes, it is. I'm a lifelong San Antonio kid. So I was born here. For those who are from here, Jackson Keller, Nimitz Middle School, Lee High School. I grew up like a lot of San Antonio kids wanting to leave. The idea was, as soon as I'm done, I'll be out. And I say that respectfully. And wouldn't you know it, I really never did. I went to Trinity University and then started interning for a couple of years, even when I was in college, at the time KMOL, with a guy named Pete Delgado, a longtime friend, and, of course, Don Harris. And then got a job, a part-time job. This is, I think people always ask and whatever. I don't mind sharing this. My job for the first 4 years of my career my title was part-time sports producer, which meant I had to come in and edit and cut tape and watch games and help Don with weekend shows. And 6 times a year I got to anchor the sportscast. And I thought I was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing. And they paid me for 28 hours a week at $7 an hour, and that was it. And it didn't matter if I was on TV or if I wasn't. I was getting 28 hours a week, $7 an hour, which isn't a whole lot. But I did that for 4 years. I went to West Palm Beach for 2. I was very lucky and excited to have that opportunity, and then the job came open, and I came back here in 2000. And ever since then, I've done, we kind of alluded to it, but I had a chance. I had a front row seat to the golden era of the San Antonio Spurs, obviously, some great high school football, the Dallas Cowboy drama that always is, which was fantastic. And did TV, had a couple of stints on radio, which I absolutely love and was grateful to do. And then in 2018, I got a chance to go to the morning news, and it worked out better for me because of the better thing that I do in life, my bigger role, and that's to be a husband and a father. And as people say, how do you get up at 2 a.m. in the morning? I say, because I don't miss a practice or a game in the evenings. And I'm very lucky for that, and I'm grateful for that. And I enjoy telling stories, whether it's sports or news or whatever. So, in essence, that's me.
Yeah, still get the chance to put some sports stories together and do a lot of fun stuff. David has a trademark edit where he just choppily does some stuff like really quick right at the beginning of all of his stories, and it's like it's like the David Chancellor trademark. So that's David. He was also here for basically the entirety of Tony Parker's career with the Spurs. I believe you covered almost every year except for maybe the last one in 2018.
Was I here?
You might have been in sports.
I met him on draft night. We did a satellite interview he was in New York, obviously. It was 10 minutes after he shook the commissioner's hand. I famously said, when you come to town, I'll buy you Tex-Mex. And he said, you'll buy Tex-Mex? And I said, oh, wait a minute. You're the $1 million athlete. You'll buy Tex-Mex. And 23, 24 years later, I'm still waiting for that invite from Tony Parker to get Tex-Mex. Although I did see did you see this party that he had? Jeez Louise.
Where's my invite?
Holy gosh. Like, if you don't know what we're talking about, go to social media. I saw it on Twitter.
Go to Tony Parker's Instagram.
He threw a wild shindig pool party to go into the Hall of Fame. I don't know who. David Robinson was there.
He jumped off like a 35-foot cliff into a pool that didn't seem very deep. So
I think he's been trying to sell that place, and it's like, dude, the only people that can afford that are George Strait and other Spurs. You have a rock diving cliff.
Sell it to Wemby.
Yes, Wemby. Yes, he's the only one.
So let's get to the Hall of Fame. Two of the legends of the game are going in, and probably the best coach of all time. Yeah. Highest winning percentage, most wins of all time for a head coach. And then Tony Parker, whose place in history might be questionable, but place in history of San Antonio is not. He's one of those lifelong Spurs, probably a top 4 Spur of all time, depending where you want to put him and Manu. So for you, as someone who watched these years kind of play out, covered almost every championship except for the first one, right? How was it being around them and doing that interview with Tony Parker and being around Pop for 18 years and doing all of this Spurs coverage and seeing these two legends kind of unfold their legacy right in front of you?
It was the craziest thing in the world, man, because I was just so grateful now, but I don't remember any of it as far as, like, I don't remember thinking, oh my gosh, like, this is David Robinson and Tim Duncan. David Robinson, before Tim, David Robinson was the greatest Spur of all time. Shout out to Ice, obviously. And then Tim comes along, and it's like he blows past David. And you would go, and to do your job, you don't look at them as icons. You don't look at Tim Duncan as one of the 10 best players of all time. You don't look at David Robinson as the whole officer and the gentleman. You also forget 25 years later what a complete stud David Robinson was. Oh, yeah. We're talking about a 7-foot center who could walk on his hands the length of the court of the basketball court. Like, that's the kind of athlete that we're talking about. You say Greg Popovich, and I think wins. I think culture. I think just an incredibly tough interview. Just a scary, tough interview.
Like, what is it about that? Because, he's famously stubborn and I don't even know what other word to use while he's up on the podium, and with Craig Sager, he had a nice little joking.
Because he won't answer your question, Matt, because you will ask a question, he sits there and he stares at you, right? And that's uncomfortable. Like, if you're listening to this, but you can play this little game. You and your wife, your husband, your friend, whatever. Just find somebody else, and one of you talk, and the other one just stare into their soul. And when the person talking is done asking a question, have that long pause. And it's like, oh my God, what's happening here? What's going to happen? I remember.
My wife does that to me when I don't take out the trash.
But he gets a bad rap for that. And I don't, I think really the only people that care about that stuff are media people. Like, media dorks care about, getting insulted by Pop. And I think the act is played out too. I mean, 30 years later. But I mean, Pop behind the scenes is he's very engaging. He's very charismatic. He's very funny. He's obviously incredibly caring and thoughtful on his place in the world, and the fact that his place in the world doesn't mean a hill of beans compared to the whole thing. That's the genius of Pop, right? He takes the greatest player of all time and he's like, dude, get over yourself. Who cares?
Yeah. When is it that you knew that Coach Pop, the guy who is the coach of your hometown team, was going to become the unquestioned greatest basketball coach of all time? And if anyone has a question, just go away.
God,
for
it's
a
a great
couple of
question.
Minutes. When did you know that was going to be what this is?
Well, I think I don't know if there's a moment that stands out to me, Matt. I think what stands out to me is over the years, A, covering him, and then B, being a San Antonio kid. And wherever you're from, right? Like, you always want somebody else. You want the outside world to look at you and say, man, that's really cool what you have. You have the best food, or you have the best, whatever. With Pop, during the whole Spurs-Lakers deal, I think, and hearing Kobe and Shaq talk, Phil ripped them. Phil wrote a book, and he called them what was that word? He called the Spurs coaching staff, including Pop, the simulators, because they didn't play. Mm-hmm. They didn't play. They didn't have NBA experience, and Phil did. Well, that didn't mean a hill of beans.
I mean, kind of.
Becky Hammond is a wonderful coach.
Yeah.
She's a great modern day example. She's never played in the NBA and never will. That doesn't mean she can't be an NBA coach. And I remember...
There's a lot of examples. Eric Spoelstra never played in the NBA.
But see, you go back to early 2000, 1999, the back and forth between the Spurs and Lakers, and that was a thing. That was something that Phil did to sort of needle the Spurs. But when Kobe and Shaq and LeBron over the years started talking about Pop in a reverence sort of manner, you start to think, oh, you got something. And then I'll tell you this. There's a bunch of behind-the-scenes things that you're like, man, that's what I remember about Pop. It's not the wins. It's not the championships. It's not the counting off the championships on the River Parade boat that everybody shows. But they had lost point 4, the game against the Lakers in 2004 with the Derek Fisher shot. And the next day I get on a plane with our photographer Goose, and we fly out to LA for what was then Game 6, right? And we're getting ready to do a live shot for the 5 or 6 o'clock news here in San Antonio, and we're outside the Spurs hotel. And Goose is setting everything up, and I'm getting ready to do my thing, and I'm going over my notes, and I just hear this voice yelling down from above. Mm-hmm. What the bleep are you doing here? What the bleep are you doing here? And I'm like, what? And I look up, and it's Pop about 6 or 7 rows up from his balcony. And I go, hey. And he goes, what are you doing here? And I said, you know what we're doing here? And he goes, laughs. He goes, we're done. We're done. And that moment, I realized, oh, it's just a game. Like, it's just a game. And I say that very respectfully. Like, yes, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. These guys are making millions of dollars. But for everybody who's like, I always, to get serious for a second, like, you hear these stories sometimes about like domestic violence after Super Bowls or big sporting events. Mm-hmm. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life, because the athletes and the coaches, they don't take it nearly as seriously as some yokel that does. Mm-hmm. And so you see that. And more to the point about what we're talking about with Pop, he always said, get over yourself, know your place, know your role. It's just sports. And that was a moment where it sort of, he put his money where his mouth was. And I thought, you know what? It is just a game. And I think that is the genius of his coaching, because he allowed his players to relax for 22 hours out of the day. And for that 3 hours on any given night, give me everything you got. Mm-hmm. And then when it's done, we're going to go back to being normal, civilized human beings. So,
yeah, I mean, watching from afar, because I'm from California. I've moved around a bit, but watching from afar, it was just amazing to me how he got everybody to invest into what they were doing, even from the beginning. I mean, they get David, or they already have David when he's here, has Tim, wins the first one, and then everyone just kind of is like, well, I guess this is the way we're doing things now. It's just like everyone starts believing, and then you get Mono, you get all the rest of the guys, you get Tony, and it just becomes this culture that is unequivocally the best in the NBA for 20 years. And it seems like there was never a moment where it was like, okay, Pop is Pop. Pop is the best coach of all time. There was never that moment. We all just kind of accepted it because of what was happening on the court. We all just kind of figured, okay, they won a championship. He came down from being the GM to become the coach. And wow, what a weird move. And then he starts winning. And then they just kept winning. And so there was never a time for everybody around the NBA and all the fans to be like, what is going on here? Why is he winning? We were all just kind of accepted it, and it was just like, okay, look what he did on the court, and just kind of accepted his greatness instead of kind of analyzing what made him great. And so it's great to hear those kinds of stories.
Well, he's so complex because, I remember years, maybe a championship or two in, I did a sit down with him, and I asked him, I think the question was something along the lines of like, how does a tough military-minded guy, older, guy in his mid-50s or whatever it was, relate to a laid-back island dude? And I remember him saying, well, who says I'm not laid back? It was like, that's sort of the genius of Pop, of like this outside perception. We're not doing that. What we are going to do is we're going to work hard, and we're all going to do it. And Tim Duncan, I know that you're the number one pick, but you're going to get coached just as hard as the guy who I'm going to cut in a week. But yet he didn't put up with Dennis Rodman's nonsense when he was the GM. He
Right.
did for a moment, but then ultimately it was like, I'm not doing that. We're not doing that drama. What we are going to do, we're not going to be held hostage by ego. What we're going to be held hostage to is this idea that there's something bigger and better than us. And when you have Tim Duncan buying into that, great example. David Robinson's early in David's career, early on, there was this legendary story of, and whether it was Larry Brown as the coach or Tark or John Lucas, David Robinson would wear one of those electronic Casio watches, from the 80s. And if he wore his watch to practice, it was the signal, hey, this isn't going to be a hard practice. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. That would never happen with Pop. Ever. Right? One of the 50 greatest players of all time. He wouldn't allow that. And so Matt, you talk about culture and setting the stage and all of his genius and everything. That right there, we're all going to pull on the rope all at once. You've obviously talked about we're all going to pound the rock. Period. Mm-hmm. Because it's not what you hit and it's not what I hit. It's what we hit. And at some point, boom, the rock burst. But it's not because of you and it's not because of me. It's because of we.
Why is it that you think that in my opinion, the Spurs of the last 20 years are underappreciated in 25 years?
Because they're boring. Because they were boring.
Yeah, and
that's what everybody's saying, right?
Right. I mean, you have one of the 10 best players of all time in Tim Duncan. You probably have a top 75 player of all time in Manu and Tony, maybe top 100. Let's just call it top 100 just to be safe. You have a top 50 player of all time that was participated in that in David Robinson. You have Kawhi that played in 2014 and helped win a championship then, was the Finals MVP. Why are they so underrated from everybody? Just because they're boring?
Well, I think that's the easy answer. I think I think if you dig into it, you got to look at their eras, and that is the real genius of this whole thing. They were in the Shaq and Kobe era. They were in the LeBron era, and they were towards the very beginning of the Steph Curry era.
Yep.
And, all three of those entities, the Lakers, LeBron, and then the Warriors, I mean, those are way sexier. You're talking about mega stars that had Madison Square or Madison Avenue appeal. I mean, they're in commercials and all that. Spurs didn't do that. Tim Duncan didn't do that. If Tim would have been different, maybe they would have. I think if Tim Duncan plays in New York as Tim Duncan, I think he's a bigger star than he is. If Tim Duncan had played in San Antonio but had Steph's personality, they wouldn't have been overlooked. They wouldn't be considered boring.
And I've never met Tim, but from accounts from you, from Don, from Chuck, he's not that guy. He's not the give me endorsements kind of guy. He's like, let's just go play and win this freaking game kind of guy.
He wants to play, and then when it's over, he wanted at the time he wanted to play video games. Now he wants to be around his kids. It's just not what he's into.
Right.
He just didn't understand. He didn't understand. It was just the perfect match with Pop. He didn't understand why there was so much being made about his success. Like, why do you care?
Right.
Why are you here? Why are you here? What is it? You got to come to my practice? Why? That was his attitude about it. And it was so, the NBA is so glitz, it's so glam, it's so look at me, and he is so not. And so it was, and then you have obviously Manu and Tony, who I think probably could have and wanted, I don't know this to be a fact, but probably wanted a little more glitz, but they fell in line. They fell in line because of Pop demanded it, but also because they did so out of reverence to Tim Duncan.
So very quickly, is Pop the GOAT? Yes or no? Greatest of all time in coaching, in NBA coaching.
He shares it with Phil Jackson.
Okay. Do you think too much energy is put towards narratives like, was it Tim or Pop, or was it Brady or Belichick?
Yeah.
Do you think that there's too much put on those things?
Yeah, I mean, it's a players' league, and there's so many, obvious evidences of that. But I mean, they needed each other, and they're a great combination. They're the four of them are. I think the four of them needed each other. I don't know if they win more than a championship without the four of them together. And so, yeah, there's way, way too much about chicken and the egg.
I think it's like people trying to denigrate Pop for the players that he had. And it's like, yeah, you had one of the top 10 players of all time, but they don't do this without each other. Brady doesn't do it without Belichick. Belichick doesn't do it without Brady. Pop doesn't do it without Duncan, and vice versa. It's like none of this happens without the perfect combination of willingness to give up and sacrifice to win, and willingness to learn, both on the player's part and on the coach's part. Like, none of that happens without each other.
The only persons that are doing that argument are stuck in the AAU culture, right? I mean, it's like that doesn't happen in the real world, whether it's sports or business or medicine or journalism. Like, there is no music. Like, there's just no, this isn't a singular act. This isn't one person with a trumpet playing. Like, this is a symphony. and to do so and to have the success they've had. It is irritating when people try to say, well, who's the most important? I mean, I guess Tim Duncan, but he's not Tim Duncan without Greg Popovich.
Do you think, going along those lines about who was the most important, to put in quotes, do you think that Tony Parker was underappreciated on those teams?
Yeah, for sure.
It seems like to me that he was the third fiddle, I guess, in the big three between him, Tim, and Manu. Even though Manu came off the bench and Tony started, it always seemed like he was third in the pecking order.
Yeah.
Why does it seem like that?
Well, he was 19. Obviously when he came over, and
even later in his career, it seemed that way.
Well, by then, Duncan had such a shadow, and Manu was just such a cult figure. There was such a cool factor about Manu. And Tony seemed, if there was ever anybody who seemed a little bit of the for example, Tony makes an all-star team, I believe his first in 2006. The game's check me on the year, but it's in Houston, right? And I believe it's his first. He and Tim are all-stars. And we go to cover it. And we go to the all-star media availability, and we're talking, and I run into Tony Parker's father, who's a very nice man. And he says, hey, you guys want to come to a party tonight? Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, Tony's throwing a party. Well, it turns out Tony was throwing a party for everybody, right? He was throwing a party for the city of Houston, where he was, Matt, going to rap. So he debuted his rap CD, his rap career there at All-Star Weekend. And longtime Spurs fans have heard the rap. They've heard the songs. They know it. You can Google it if you don't. But it's like, oh, that doesn't seem like that's a very Spur-like thing to do.
Not a very Spur.
It doesn't seem like
05-06 was the All-Star game.
So it doesn't seem like it's a really smart thing to do either. But that was Tony starting. So you said 05-06?
Yes.
Well, he's the Finals MVP a year later in 2007, right? So there was that little stretch. But I'll tell you a great story about, it's not disrespect, but it's sort of, it's an inside to the window to how the Spurs looked at Parker. 2003, they're going back and forth, right? Tony's always starting, but Speedy Claxton's having to finish games. In fact, he famously, closed out the Game 6 of the Finals against the Nets. And that led to the whole Jason Kidd talk that summer and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But leading up to all of this, they were playing the Mavericks in the Western Conference Finals, I believe. And we're doing a radio interview. Don Harris and I are doing a radio interview with Pop in a hotel room in Dallas. Hotel ballroom, I should say. And Pop comes in and he sits down right before we go on, doesn't say a word. Red light comes on. We're doing the interviews. He is typical Pop, man. Like, he don't want to be there. He's only doing it because he's got to be. Answer, question, answer, blah, blah, blah. Boom. We go to commercial. I mean, literally as the mics went silent, he jumps up. And I'll never forget this, Matt. It was at this, like a boardroom, this giant table. And there's all these little bowls around with these tiny M&Ms. Now, that's common today, but I'll take you back. We're talking 20 years ago. I'd never even seen, quote, mini M&Ms. Mm-hmm. It was like, oh, my God. Like, you're thinking, this is great. The craziest, most fun, expensive hotel ever. And if you've ever seen or met Pop in person, I mean, you forget, like, he was a basketball player, for the Air Force and, out of the Air Force. Like, the dude has huge hands. Right? So he jumps up as soon as we go to the commercial break, and he grabs just a hunk of M&Ms, and he's throwing them in his mouth, and he starts telling this story about Tony Parker. And I'm not going to tell you the story, but he does a Tony Parker impression, right? And he's going back and forth, and it's, oh, my God. And Don and I are just like, oh, my God, this is the funniest thing ever. Like, if people could see this. Mm-hmm. And the engineer is like, all right, stand by, 5, 4, 3. Boom. Red light comes back on. He literally, it's like putting on a different pair of, he just, Superman. He just walked right back into Pop mode. And A, that gives you a window into Pop. Mm-hmm. But B, he would never do that about Tony Parker, about Tim Duncan or Manu Ginobili. Now, that doesn't mean that he doesn't respect Tony Parker, because I think he does. But I think he was always hard on Tony because a coach is always hard on, I think, on his quarterback, on his leader. And in this case, it was his floor leader. You know, there's a famous video that I saw the other day where Parker walks off, and it was later in his career, and Pop says, "Hey, man, I thought you played great. I know you didn't get 30, but you ran the show." And Tony says, "Hey, Pop, I did what you wanted. I found the open guy." And there was always that teaching. So I think there was always a push and a pull between Pop and Parker. And I think the outside world sensed that, to answer your question, to come full circle. And that's why if there was ever sort of a, well, he's not quite Tim or Manu, but you know what? He damn sure was.
It's like he was that player that if he went to a different team in his prime, he might have been able to score 30, 35 points and been that superstar.
Absolutely.
But because he was on the Spurs and he was doing what Pop asked him to do.
Yes. And I think, you know, there was always that, you know, we always use New York as a example, I think, because the New York media, you know, tends to blow up their, you know, if they have an average athlete, they're going to make him superhuman. But I think if you take any one of those three, I mean, if Manu Ginobili had played for the New York Knicks, he would have been an 8-time All-Star.
He would have slapped out of the air a lot of bats.
Yes, he would have.
That's what he would have. But I think it speaks to the respect that Pop has to Tony, because he's waiting until after Tony gets inducted to get inducted, because he wanted to be inducted by all three of them and get introduced.
Well, I can say, you know, without knowing how Pop truly feels, you know, I think there's a bit of that father feeling of, I mean, we literally watched this kid mature and really, you know, he struggled. There were things that he did on the court. There were obviously struggles off the court, and we saw it. And we saw it in an era and an age where Twitter and social media wasn't prevalent. So that's how big he was even here, was we all knew about it and the rumors and everything that was happening. And yet it was a constant educational process. And, you know, I also think the flirtation with Jason Kidd is the stench that just sort of hangs. Nobody ever talked about replacing Manu. Nobody would ever obviously talk about replacing David or Tim. And so I think that there's always that real microscopic asterisk.
There's always just like a little bit of pinprick, like just a little bit of like.
And it should be erased because, you know, 2003 on, I mean, he was fantastic. He was fantastic.
I mean, this year pretty much culminates what we've been seeing for the last 25 years, and it puts the last of the 5 mainstays for the Spurs in. I mean, it puts David already in, Tim already in, Manu already in last year, Tony now going in, and Greg now allowing himself to go in, even though he could have gone in 10 years ago if he really wanted to.
By the way, that bugs me.
Why?
The idea, like, I think he should be retired.
Yeah, I agree. Because Jerry Sloan did the same thing.
It's weird.
It's weird that you now have like a Hall of Fame coach, and it's not just like alleged Hall of Fame. Like we're not projecting. Right. He's like actually a Hall of Fame coach, like on the sidelines.
It's like, I mean, it's the culmination. If you were a professional athlete or coach, like it is the culmination of your individual career and success.
Why do they do that?
I don't know.
It's the only one.
It's like I half expect. So we're doing this now on a Friday. Like, when's the ceremony? Tomorrow night?
Tomorrow night.
Like,
they have their press conference today.
I half expect jokingly him to say, and by the way, I'm retired. Because it just is weird.
Yeah, it's strange. I don't fully agree with like the NFL having a 5-year rule, but at least like 1 year.
Yeah.
Like just give me a year just to make sure that you're retired, and
maybe
then go
it was
in,
always going to happen. Maybe he thought, I am going to retire. Oh God, we got Wemby. I got to stay here another 5 years.
Or maybe he just like he saw that Tony was probably going to get in. He was like, maybe I'll go in with Tony, and then all my guys are in, and then
well, it's fitting because he's the one that made Pop age faster the most. Probably.
Well, Wemby's going to do that too, I'm sure.
Yes, he is.
So. Well, anyway, congratulations to Tony and to Coach Pop, two of the greatest of all time. Tony, obviously a top 5 Spur behind George, besides Ice, Tim, Manu, and David, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, Manu and him can switch, maybe 4 and 5, but
yeah, I think I go Tim, David, Ice. I probably go Manu, Tony.
Yeah, and then Sean Elliott right after that, probably. And then to probably the greatest coach of all time. If he's top 2, and he's probably not 2. I mean, he's besides him, Phil, Pat Riley. He's probably the greatest coach of all time. He's definitely the most winningest coach of all time. And he probably always will be.
That's interesting because it's the 11 champ. There's 2 numbers, right? And that's how we. It's a great debate, and the only thing that people use is numbers, right? So you have Phil and his 11 championships, and then you have Pop, and you have obviously the wins. But for me, it's not the wins, and it's not the number of wins. It's the 20. Is it 22?
Yeah.
It's 22 straight 50-win seasons.
Yeah. It's the longevity of it, and they all kind of have their like different claims to fame. Like Phil Jackson, 3 3-peats and a 2-peat. Andy played, and he was a great. He was just great on the sidelines for multiple different teams. Pat Riley, good player, good coach, good GM, good president. He just has kind of that whole.
Yeah, it's excellence.
That whole era of excellence for him. And then you have Pop, who is like the shucksy doodles. Like he's just there, and he has 25 years of nonstop success.
25 years of nonstop success in one of the smaller markets in the NBA where nobody really ever really wanted to come.
Mm-hmm.
They always struck out on the big person most of the time, and yet somehow found a way to win.
Yeah, because they draft and develop.
Right.
Every single time they draft and develop. You see that with Kawhi, you're going to see that with Wemby, you see that with Tim, Manu, Tony, all of them. So I know it's a tribute to those guys, and the first 35-ish minutes were spent on them, but we're going to get really quickly to a couple other things. So the Johnny Manziel doc came out this week. He's from Kerrville, which is just up the road from us. So I wanted to touch on that a little bit with you. Did you cover Johnny when he was up at Kerrville, Tybee?
I did.
What did you think of him?
Oh, he was amazing. So I have watched the documentary. I thought when I watched it, my wife and I watched it together, and when they were showing the Kerrville stuff, she said, "Oh my God, I can't remember. I don't remember him being this good."
I was looking for Jack Green on the sidelines.
I mean, he was, not to go too inside, but like when you're building your high school coverage on every week, like he was how you built it around, and it was an hour away. And it was difficult because of a logistics like, oh, my God, we got to go out to Kerrville again. Like, you may only go to Kerrville once a year.
Yeah.
And for 2 years, you were going out every single game. Like, it was, you have to have Johnny. It wasn't like, hey, we'll put a score up. It's like, I have to have the highlights because I'm going to see something that I probably never have seen before. And that's really, with respect to, remember, he came out of the same class. It was Johnny, it was Malcolm Brown from Steele, and it was Aaron Green from Madison. And these guys were all competing on the field at the same time. And you had these other great programs as well. I met him, I think going into his junior year. He was incredibly kind. He was incredibly respectful. And then, obviously, covering him at A&M, I was there the night. I was in New York when he won the Heisman, which was the craziest thing in the world. And I remember my thought when he won the Heisman was, man, the world has our guy now. Like, he's not our guy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, not that I ever would, but like, or would it matter? But like, I couldn't be like, hey, Johnny, Hey, Johnny, remember? Like, Johnny was, I mean, if you've seen the documentary, Johnny was hanging out with LeBron and Drake. I mean, jeez.
What was your main takeaway from the rise and fall of Johnny Manziel doc that came out on Netflix? Because for me, it underscored it was more sad than anything.
It was 100% sad,
and it underscored to me the lack of direction he had once he left Kerrville, because you have Kevin Sumlin, who didn't really do much to him in terms of punishment and thinking about the kid that we have here. And then you have Cliff Kingsbury, who is sending people to go get him from parties and letting him play hungover. Even though he played well, you don't have anyone being like, you know what, if you're coming in hungover, you're not playing. Because they put the money before the kid, and that just made me really upset. As
a dad, I did not agree with Paul Manziel's comment of, you send your kid to college and you expect, the coaching staff to not only build a good football player, but a good person. And I thought, yeah, I kind of get that. But, I mean, he's still your kid.
Right.
Like, he's still your kid. And when I'm 80 and my son is whatever he is, 40, like, he's still my kid. I felt a lot of things. You're right. Sadness was the number one thing. I felt a little anger. I felt a lot ashamed for all of the things that we did and said in the media about him. Not because it wasn't true, but because we were part of the machine in the sense of, I don't care the person I didn't care about. I cared about the story. I cared the fact that, this gave me a guy, I could do a minute segment on, here's Dave's 2 cents. Let me rail on Johnny. I did a radio show at the time, and it was like, Johnny was a segment every day.
Yeah.
For what? Like, for a kid was, a human being was literally struck. Now, he did it to himself. I teared up when I saw literally the last segment where he is in the golf cart with his dad, because I thought, well, thank God he's alive.
Yeah, it's like redemption almost.
Like, yeah. That wasn't.
Yeah.
Like, he's not like, he's at least how I read it, he's still smoking weed, hanging out, partying and drinking, and it's like, but those things don't work for you, man. Like, I just want to shake him and be like, I don't understand, but I don't know him, and I don't know, it's not my right to tell a 30-year-old man, how to feel, what to do, but it was just, if you care at all about high school football and, South Texas and all of that, like, you should watch it. It's a trip down memory lane. And all the people who've said, it's the biggest cliche, but it's so true. You cannot write the history of college football without Johnny Manziel. Like, he has that kind of imprint on it.
You can't. And like I said, my main takeaway was like this: there were so many people that could have helped him that didn't, because they just saw dollar signs, and they forced him to go and sign autographs for money, and then he didn't have any guidance of how to use that money or how to keep that money or what to do with the money. So he just went out and spent it and blew it all on drugs and whatever else. So, and partying and all that stuff. And then it made me sad also that he just kind of cast his friend aside.
Yeah.
And
Uncle Nate.
Yeah, Uncle Nate, that he was going and left Uncle Nate in the dust and let him kind of just take the daggers from everybody, and then went with Burkhart, and then Burkhart didn't help at all. So it just made it, and then at the end, like you were saying, those last couple of scenes, the Stella Artois that's sitting on there when he's playing darts with his friends in Scottsdale. It's like, usually you try and end a documentary by like, oh, look where he is now, and it's like, I saw where he was now, and then I feel like I just saw where he's going to be.
Right. Like, yes, he's alive, and he looks healthier than he did when he was, what'd they say he was,
170 pounds. He lost 45 pounds.
That's nothing but coke. Like, it's just like, what are you doing?
Yeah. So, I thought the documentary was a little bit rushed. But
that's fair.
I just thought like they really kind of sped through high school, and like they didn't really give up some info on like the making of Johnny Manziel?
Yeah, for Netflix and having like, Netflix is big on, I have a, 3-part series on this, and
Right.
this. I could have done 3 parts.
You could have done 3 parts with that and taken like high school, the first couple of games of college,
True
and
that.
then kind of played it out that way. But last thing I want to get to with David, because he's got another show to do here at noon. Just for the record, David, he and I disagree on Dak. So for the for the record, what's your opinion on Dak Prescott, and will the Cowboys ever win a Super Bowl with him at the helm?
That's a great question, man. That is a great question. Let me say this. I stand by my tweet that I put out earlier this week, and that is this. I enjoy the anticipation of football season, I think, more than I enjoy actual football season.
That's because you're a Cowboys fan.
and that's the punchline. Do I think they can win a Super Bowl with Dak? Yeah, I do. I think Dak is one of the, just for argument's sake, one of the 10 best quarterbacks in the league. I think you can split hairs and say, is he 12? Is he 13? I don't think he's 20.
He's not 20.
Right? And I don't think he's 5. Here's what I think. Patrick Mahomes is 1. And everything else after that is a real distant second. You have a bunch of really, you don't have a bunch. You have a couple of excellent young quarterbacks with potential. I love Joe Burrow. I wish Joe Burrow was my quarterback. Anybody who says that, I'll take Dak. I mean, of course. Of course. Josh Allen is super young and has a ton of potential. Justin Herbert can throw it through the moon, right?
Jalen Hurts.
Jalen Hurts has a year.
Yep.
Jalen Hurts has a year. Now, if Jalen Hurts backs up last year with, this year with last year, and then, you're like, okay. But, I mean, to say, he's head and shoulders above Dak, I don't agree with that. Here's where I don't get into, and I'm not going to go down each guy and all of this kind of stuff. Aaron Rodgers is a legend. So basically, you have a legend in Rodgers. You have Mahomes, who's just some sort of freak god, and then you have Burrows, who's like, God, it seems like he's the guy.
And Josh
Allen. And Josh Allen is loaded with potential. Stop giving me Justin Herbert. He hasn't done anything and he hasn't won anything. Lamar Jackson never wins in the playoffs. Russell Wilson hasn't won a Super Bowl in a decade.
Hey, don't talk about my quarterback like that.
I know he's your guy. That's your team. You go down the teams, and I think Dak makes. I don't think that Dak makes the Cowboys infinitely better. I think Dak is a good quarterback on potentially a team with a great defense.
I think Dak is one of those guys that is going to go down in the history of the league that is a good quarterback that never won a Super Bowl. I think you can put him in the Kirk Cousins category. He's going to be a quarterback that'll win you some games, and he's going to be a quarterback that'll lose you some games. And the talk right now he's making $40-some-odd million a year, and he has a big cap number next year, so they're talking about restructuring his deal and bringing him up to market value up at $50 million. He's not worth that. If I was Jerry Jones, I would let him play out his contract, maybe restructure next year, but not re-extend, because I don't think that they're ever going to get any further than they have with Dak. I would cut bait and draft another quarterback or trade for another quarterback. Maybe trade for Trey Lance, because at least then you have some potential and you don't know what the ceiling is. But I think that they've reached the ceiling with Dak already. They know what Dak is. He's going into year 8. He's 30 years old now. You know what he is.
You do, but the ceiling to me is higher with him than it is with a guy like Trey Lance, just for the simple fact of you can win anywhere between 10 and 13 games with Dak. Can you get a playoff win, maybe 2? Can you get lucky and somehow win a Super Bowl? Maybe. But I think you can win a couple of playoff games. He had an awful year last year. He led the league in interceptions, as it's well documented, right? And he still missed, 4 or 5 games?
5, yeah.
So awful. The year before, he was amazing with 37-10. Then year before that, he had a semi-decent year. Year before that, he was great. 30 touchdowns, 10 or 11 picks. There's a pattern here. Great one year, not so great the next year. Great one year, not so great the next. That means this year's going to be great.
Deductive reasoning. I like it.
I'll say this. His rookie training camp, before Romo went down, I asked him, are you competing with Kellen to be the backup? And he looked me dead in the eye and he said, I'm competing to be the starter. This is with Romo at Romo like legendary status. And you can call it bravado, you can call it cockiness, but there's that leadership there of, listen, if I don't believe it, then I can't do it. And I think that's what the Cowboys are enamored by. Like, Jerry wants him to, like, everybody should. Cowboy fans who bash Dak Prescott, I don't get you. Like, you should want this guy to do it because he is one of the good guys. He's a guy that you're like, man, I tell my son all the time, you hear what he says? You hear what he does? That's what a leader is.
Yeah.
You just want to see it.
I just need everything you said is accurate. Like, he's a good dude. He's a great leader.
Yeah.
You want him in your locker room.
He's a good quarterback.
He's a good quarterback. He's not a great quarterback. And he's never going to.
Well, that's the question. Do you need a great one to win a Super Bowl?
As of the last few years.
Because if we're holding him to the Mahomes standard.
Well, I mean, Matt Stafford too. I think Matt Stafford's better than Dak Prescott.
See, I don't. I think he's physically more gifted, but it's like all he did was lose in Detroit. If he's so good, why didn't he make the Lions better?
He did. You see those Detroit teams?
It's not like they were some playoff staple.
Yeah, because they're in Detroit. Detroit just historically sucks.
I mean, it's
the only thing that can bring Detroit back is Dan Campbell. Okay.
Now, I think the debate is this: if Dak got hurt, knock on wood, because you never want a guy to get hurt, right?
Absolutely not.
If Dak got hurt early, or they stumbled 0-2, and they're not going to do it at 0-2, but say the wheels come off early. At what point do you say, you know what? We're going all in on Caleb Williams. And for those who don't know, he is, by all accounts, the second coming of Patrick Mahomes.
He's amazing.
And he's a fun kid to watch. He is going to be the face of a franchise like Mahomes. He's the next one. And he's not, I hate doing this, but it's like he's the Wemby. He's the guy who you tank for to hopefully turn your franchise around.
He's better than Bryce Young, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So if Dak is struggling, do you do that? Do you pull it?
Yeah, if I would move heaven and earth to get the first pick in the draft if I was the Cowboys.
There's nothing they have, or there's nothing they will have other than losing.
I would trade I would trade Jerry Jones for Caleb Williams.
I mean, it would take Michael Parsons and about 15 first-round picks.
They could probably trade. I mean, this is crazy hypothetical,
yeah.
But they could trade pretty much everything except for CD or Micah, and I'd be fine with it.
Yeah, they'd have to,
along with their entire war chest of picks. I don't even care.
They would
one pick next year.
They would have to, and almost like stock in the Cowboys.
Yeah,
we're going to give you stock in a $9 billion franchise.
So, I mean, we agree that Dak's a good person, but David's wrong that he's actually a good quarterback.
We agree he's a good human being.
But we vastly disagree on his potential.
I'm coming back on this thing when he's like 13-3.
Okay, and then you can come back when they lose in the second round of the playoffs, because that's what they're probably going to do.
As long as it's not against San Francisco. I can't have them lose to them anymore.
What if they lose to the Eagles? Is that
better? That's worse. There's not a franchise. There's not a franchise in all of sports that I hate more than the Philadelphia Eagles.
All right, well, I can't end this without giving like 30 seconds of praise to Dwayne Wade as well. He's a Miami Heat guy. He's going into the Hall of Fame tomorrow as well. He's my favorite player of all time. Congratulations to Dwayne. He's the reason I am a Miami Heat fan, is him and Shaq. So.
He is one half of the greatest sports photograph in the history of photographs.
Are you talking about the one against the Bucks with him like putting out his arms?
I'm talking about him where he throws
lobbing it up to LeBron.
Yes.
Absolutely. And so congratulations to Dwayne Wade. Congratulations to all of the inductees. What a class. Dirk Nowitzki, Pow, Tony, Pop, Dwayne Wade. You got a hell of a Becky Hammond as well. Becky Hammond we didn't really talk about, but she's
great Becky Hammond.
Great Becky Hammond. So legendary Hall of Fame class, legendary documentary, and average quarterback. So, so please download, subscribe, rate, reviews, unsubscribe, resubscribe, re-rate, re-review, give us a 5-star rating, and some feedback. Feedback is a gift. David, thank you.
Thank you, buddy, man. I enjoyed this a lot.
You're welcome back anytime, especially when we get some high school football going on.
Oh, we'll do that.
I know you're going to be watching a lot of Alamo Heights.
I do, but you guys do a great job with Friday Night Fever. Continue that tradition. By the way, the longest running high school highlight show in San Antonio, period.
And 15th season of TNL.
Is that right?
2 weeks from tomorrow. 2 weeks from yesterday. So we'll be back on Monday here on the Sneakers and Cleats podcast. See you then.